sign I should take over here. Welcome for the second technical session this morning. I have to start with a technical announcement, because with technical sessions, the one standing in front of you is not Heinrich Hagel. Yeah, my name is Markus Giese from University of Hohenheim, Hans Rutenberg Institute for Tropical Agricultural Sciences. Heinrich did not make it here due to sickness, so he's very sorry for that, but I'm representing him and his and the project here today. Well, at my side I have Daniela today, Daniela Gomez as well from the Food Security Center. She's taking notes and we are very pleased to guide you through the session today. Yeah, the session is about implication of water security for food security, and when you first think about it, it seems to be quite obvious that, well, without water you can't produce any food. So water and food security is directly, of course, linked to each other. But there's some complexity in the system. For example, if you think about drought and water stress at the one side, so there's water obviously missing in the system, but on the other hand, there could be also too much water, which is often not really considered if talking about secure systems, like floods. Yeah? And we'll have a presentation also dealing about floods today. So water availability and the distribution of water globally is very much different and over space and time. So today we are going to have 5 presentations only. There's one missing. So for those who have been visiting or who are visiting this session here to listen to the wastewater topic, I'm sorry, the speaker from Palestine is not here today. Well, we have 5 presentations, and they are going to take us to different places around the world. And that's very interesting to announce that we have a contribution from Iran today, from Bangladesh, and we have Vietnam here as well. Yeah, and somebody's going to take us to Malaysia. And finally, we got a contribution from South America and Latin America, somebody here from Ecuador. I'm very much looking forward to your presentations. I've been ordered to take care of the time, so please, when I stand up from my comfortable chair, it's your last minute. Okay, so there will be after that we have 2 minutes or 3 minutes for questions, and then at the end we can have a final discussion together and a wrap up. I'm very much looking forward, and I would like to call Nada Haidari, the first presenter, to the floor to present his contribution. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Do you use this or just this?
Please choose whatever you like. Yeah.
It is easier. Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Hello. My name is Nader. I am from Iranian Agriculture Engineering Research Institute. My presentation is about the strategies and measures the pioneer farmers use in Iran for adaptation to climate change and also water security. As an introduction, I want to make a picture of Iran's water scarcity situation. We have almost 6 major river basins with very short rainfalls from 100 to maximum around 400 millimeters. And water withdrawal rate is too high for agriculture. It is more than 80%. That is, water stress is very high in our country, in my country. Even this water scarcity is not distributed uniformly. It is severe in, for example, central and eastern parts, and less in the western and southwest areas. About the agriculture, we have almost 18.5 million hectares for agriculture. That irrigated land is 8 million hectares, and the dry land is 6.3 million hectares. And therefore, the share of use of water in agriculture is between 70 to 94%. That is, some argue on that. Some say it's less and some more. And almost about 80 billion cubic cubic meter we use for water for agriculture. And our agriculture is highly dependent to irrigation. 90% of our agricultural production is from irrigated lands. And also, recently, climate change also further intensified water scarcity situation in Iran. As you can see, this global map and the place of Iran also is located. Climate change impacts agriculture of Iran severely. For example, for cereals production, it is estimated that between 10 to 30% will reduce in 2050 and 2020, respectively. This is the situation of the water scarcity. Our study deals with the farmers' measures and opinions about the climate change and in coping to water scarcity. We visited some fields around the country, and we selected some pioneer farms because they can be used as a pilot for normal farmers. So that's why we selected these pioneer farms to see how they react to the water scarcity and to the climate change in different parts of Iran. The first farm, it is a big farm we produce olive, and it is in the central of Iran. This farmer has very beliefs to the crop residue. He uses the foliage and herbs of pruning trees for the soil reclamation. He believes that this use of crop residue with soil will provide continuous nutrition to the soil, and it is good for also frost hazards during the growing season because of warming of the soil, and also increase the holding capacity of the soil to retain more water and more irrigation when there is some drought periods. He also uses as weeds. He believes that weeds are not, we should not say to weeds, in Persian we call it waste crops, waste plants. But it's not a waste. He uses these weeds as a cover and mulching around the trees, around the wetting front of the irrigation to reduce the evaporation from the soil surface. And also don't make burning of these weeds and making greenhouse gases, and it is good also to mitigate climate change. He also uses very adaptable trees for that region. It is only crop tolerance is not enough. For example, we just cultivate crops that are tolerant to drought or climate change. It should be adaptable. For example, in Iran, many olive trees are cultivated in different places without examining the adaptability of that varieties. So he found this noticeable issue that and tested many trees in his farm, and he selected adaptable tolerant trees. And also he has also some diversity on production. Besides, he have livestock production, aloe vera crop in greenhouse production for better market. In this another farm, there is an innovation by the farmer in coping with water scarcity, use of drip irrigation for wheat production. Because wheat is commonly used by surface irrigation in Iran, and corrugation method, it uses a lot of water. But he examined the use of drip irrigation and raw cultivation of wheat, same as maize and corn. And he got high yields, about 8 tons per hectare, and water productivity of 1.6 kg per cubic meter in comparison to the average ones in the country, which is almost 4 tons per hectare and 0.8 kg per cubic meter. And again, he used diversity in production. For example, he has greenhouse production, livestock production. He exports greenhouse production to the neighboring countries. And his success is efficient use of water by irrigation technologies, use of desalinized water for greenhouse, and even use of effluent of desalination plant for the irrigation of palm trees. And also high attention to the soil proper structure and fertility. These are some measures he used for adaptation to water scarcity and climate change. For example, he used organic matter manures and green manures to mix with the soil as an organic fertilizer. Okay. Again, in the farm number 3, it is in northeast of Iran. Here you can see that the farmer uses drip irrigation again for maize production to reduce water use. And also he examined winter sowing of sugar beet instead of spring sowing, because normally in the country the sugar beet is cultivated in the spring, but he cultivated in the winter to use best use of rainfall during the non-growing season and to reduce water needed in the summer by the crop. And also some innovation on salinity management. He believes that by use of phosphoric acid through the micro irrigation system, more than to removing of clogging of the emitters, it also caused some salinity reduction. Manage salinity by this experimental method. Okay. Another case is the pioneer farmers in the Fars province of Iran. This area is facing with severe water scarcity, and a lake at the end of the catchment is drowned because of reduction of the outflows to this lake at the tail end. They have changed to their cropping system and cultivate crops that use less water, such as safflower, and also replace the system of cultivation from the wheat to the orchards like fig that use less water, and some autonomous activity on groundwater recharge in the region. If we want to have conclusion on the capacities of these farmers in adaptation to water scarcity and climate change, we should mention that they have high attention to soil organic content and water holding capacity of the soil by using of crop residue and manure, best use of irrigation technology, which leads to higher water productivity, changes in cropping pattern, and high attention to reduce non-beneficial use of water in evaporation from soil surface, diversity in production, and etc. If we also evaluate these farmers by some international standards that I speak here, the government also has no planned adaptation, and in the case of no planned adaptation, these farmers have some autonomous adaptation. The government just focus on the use of new technologies pressurized irrigation system, seedling cultivation of row crops, the greenhouse cultivation. But these farmers, they have their own methods and innovation, and but they have no long-term thinking about their business. They just emphasis on mostly crop yield increase, revenue increase, and more supply of water, saving of water for more supply of water for other crops. And they don't think about the real water saving. In other words, they continue their past behavior with the help of new tools and technologies, and they don't think in longer vision on their business. Okay, and if we want to these are some autonomous activities. Although these
last sentence.
yes, although they have not much scope on future of their business, but for the time being, these experiences could be used for the other agriculture farmers and to be disseminated by the government. It will be useful. However, we have such gaps on this issue, and this experience is not disseminated well, but it started recently. Thank you very much for your attention, and any question.
Thanks, Nada, for these examples from Iran and the innovative farmers. Are there questions? Quick questions? One and two. Yeah.
You talked about the use of
Yeah, actually, this is happened. The farmers, they don't think about the water saving at the larger scale and basin scale. They want to save water to cultivate more other crops. So they are using the technology to just use less water and to save that water for the next crop. They don't much care to the groundwater table drawdown and etc. But this is the issue that we also concluded in our country, that emphasis on improving of water productivity is the first condition, but it's not all. We should have some solution to have real water saving. But in the scale of the farmers, these are good, even if they don't think about the real water saving. I think this issue should be handled by the planners and the system. When, for example, they subsidize for using of irrigation technologies, they should reduce their water allocation and they control the pumping from the system. These are out of the farmer authority.
Thank you. That was another question. Final one.
Hello. Nader, you mentioned in one of your slides, they used innovative technique to avoid emitter blocking, bypass phosphoric acid.
Yeah.
What do you mean exactly? Yes.
Yeah. One of the advantages of the micro irrigation system is that you can use fertilizers and pesticides and any dissolving things that in the
Nader, excuse me, it is common that anyone use drip irrigation, they pass phosphoric acid to reduce the clogging of these emitters all over the world. So is there any innovative, actually I would like to know, if there innovative here to pass phosphoric acid?
But phosphoric acid, his innovation, maybe he has some samples and examine that it has positive effects also on soil salinity. I mean, it reduces the crop stress by using this solution. It has also on soil effects. But sulfuric acid is not common for clogging, removing of the chlorine. Normally, sulfuric acid is used. Phosphoric acid is not common in using the clogging.
Okay, I suggest that maybe this discussion can continue during the lunch break. Thank you so much, Nada, for this example from Iran, and let's give him a hand. Then I would like to ask the second presenter today, Mr. Tawhid Rahman. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. This is Professor Tawhid from MIST, Maintenance of Science and Technology, Bangladesh. As you can see here, the title, Sustainable Adaptation Practices Ensuring Food Security in Southwestern part of Bangladesh. Basically, this is actually coastal area where most of the times in salinity and other actually soil salinity as well, water salinity, and climate migration are facing severely. This is the presentation outline, as you can see here. So, as you can mention here, so this is actually what is the here? No here. Okay, this is the actually coastal areas of Bangladesh. So I am focusing mainly on these areas. So as you can see here, the climate migration, because of water quality issue and soil salinity increased, and at the same time they are actually shrinkage of their actual professions and change their shifting their profession. That's why people are migrating from that city, that town, to the nearby big community and big city. So I will actually explain mainly three issues very briefly. First, the freshwater crisis issue, and then how to reduce the climate migrant, and the third one actually to show you some simple climate adaptation practices so that people can ensure their food security locally. So this is the research methodology that was followed, mainly based on water quality analysis, and then field visit, and then rainfall and temperature analysis data, and population also studied, another study, and we also actually confirmed with the sensitive analysis and rainfall pattern analysis, PCI, so that actually the rainfall pattern is decreasing and the temperature is increasing. I will show you later on. So this is the field visit and field survey, including focus group discussion and key informant interview that was conducted. So actually, as you can see here, the findings, most of the farmers, they actually explained and they discussed that in summer temperature is increasing rapidly in the over last 1 decade, and the overall rainfall is also decreasing. And another thing is that actually, as I mentioned earlier, Menkindle and sense of analysis pattern also shows that confirm that the temperature increasing pattern and decreasing pattern of your rainfall. And farmers also mentioned that actually the flood level has increased much due to actually most of the rivers are silted up, and in some cases actually they are facing a shortage of water in irrigation practices. And another observation is that actually standard rainfall anomaly has actually claimed their supported their actually claim that rainfall pattern and temperature pattern have been shifted from the usual pattern last decades. So the climate migrations actually, as I mentioned earlier, that most significant number of people, elderly, including students and working people, they are actually migrating from that city to the nearby other big cities for their livelihood and for their actually pattern of their searching new jobs. So population growth pattern actually in before 2020 it was a decreasing trend, but recently the population growth is slightly increased due to the good habitation practices adopted by local farmers and our agriculture department, and our government also has taken different initiatives to reduce these climate migrants. So this is the actual water quality issue. As you can see here, the chloride concentration, basically sodium and chloride, these two are very common in saline water. So chloride concentration is very high in the most of the coastal cities that we visited and we analyzed, because of different cyclones and tornadoes, and after that storm surges, this water are got to actually with salinated high, And not only salinity but electrical conductivity, total release of solids, these are also increasing rapidly. That's why most of the surface water that are actually not usable for irrigation purposes as well as for actually other drinking purposes. So salinity increased rapidly in the last decades, and some of the parameters, most of the parameters actually are exceeded the WHO drinking quality standards as well as Bangladesh drinking quality standards. And this increased salinity has affects adversely in the livelihood of the local people, actually, especially for food production, and their shifting of the profession from farming to the previously they actually are used to farm harvest paddy and other different other local crops, but recently they shifted from shrimp cultivation, because shrimp cultivation, as you know, that some of the species of the shrimps can be cultivated in the brackish water. So that's why it is actually then the rainfall pattern, as I mentioned earlier, this is the actually temperature is going significantly actually changes in the southwestern part, and minimum temperature is also increasing, and rainfall is also actually decreasing because in that part actually during another reason is that actually due to the climate change, the rainfall calendar has been shifted from its usual time. That's why farmers are not utilizing that water for their cultivation and for their irrigation purposes. So this is the actual findings of the rainfall, and it shows that significant changes over actually observed in rainfall and temperature analysis. So the adaptation practices that was discussed and that was actually found in the significantly affect people's livelihood, that is vegetation farming, rooftop mulching and vertical farming, relief cropping, and zero tillage, and actually low water demand crops are encouraging, and floating bed cultivation. As you can see here, these are some local technologies and local options that were supported, that were suggested by the agriculture department to allow and to adopt, so that people can use very low amount of water to produce their agricultural crops, and they can survive and they can actually sell at least these crops. So different varieties of these crops are basically their lifetime are very short time harvesting time period, and it demands a lower amount of water. That's why people are getting familiar with this technology and with this adaptation practices, and due to this actually people are now encouraged and to stay there, so that not to migrate from their city, because nobody wants to migrate from his hometown to a nearby city, because it creates a lots of problem, not only job but also security, but also sanitation, local other demands. That's everybody wants to stay at their own places at any cost. So this adaptation practice actually helps them a lot to. That's why people the population and growth is now little bit increased from the earlier one. I mean 10,000 10 years back, and farmers are adapted to produce actually shrimp production, mixed rice, prawn, and fish cultivation, so that they can harvest different crops, and they can meet their protein demand within a very short span of time. And saline tolerant crop production and vegetation cultivation and organic fertilization are easier to implement in the regions. So this is the actual adaptation measures, different techniques according to the farmers' perception, which one is actually good practice for them. So most of the farmers they actually adapted that with the low water demand and salinity tolerant varieties of species. So in conclusion, I can say that actually due to the salinity in the soil as well as in the water, the livelihood became very difficult. But nowadays adaptation practices, as I mentioned earlier, sustainable practices, people are very much familiar and used to reduce the actually migration, the effort to stay there, and now actually it's a challenge for not only they are actually the coastal people, but also the government and other people, and so that to introduce another sustainable options, so that people can stay there for a longer time and to reduce the actual mitigation from the climate migrants. Thanks all for sharing. And thanks for actually providing us fund to attend this conference. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tawhid, for keeping the time, and we have time for 2 questions. There's one in the corner there.
I am Dr. Moinul Hassan from Ankara University. So just one of my questions like, is there any that data have you received, for example, due to saltwater intrusion, and how many people have migrated just only for saltwater intrusion? Because we know the migration is a multi-causal, and is there any data regarding these 2 linkages?
Okay, thank you so much. Basically, we have been working with this water quality since the last 10 years. And before that, Water Development Board and Public Health Organization, they also started working on salinity data, and Agriculture Extension Department. According to this actually multiple sources and population census that I mentioned earlier, that every 10 years population census data, and we collected. So, and linking this 2 with the field visit and field survey, and we interviewed with the different people, they mentioned that due to the increased water salinity and soil salinity, they lost their conventional agricultural practices. That's why most of them actually shifted their professions from farmer to actually fisherman, from farmer to rickshaw puller, from farmer to another profession. And as you know that actually this area is a very water stress area, and typical opportunity for jobs and other scopes are very limited. That's why they prefer to migrate to another city, and the average income of that community is very low. That's why they prefer to migrate to nearby cities. And as I showed in some pictures, that actually population data, recently the migration pattern shows that slightly is improving. People are staying, actually people prefer to stay there because there are some adoption practices and some good techniques or options offered by Bangladesh Agriculture Department and Bangladesh government to people so that they can stay there, they can actually live there, and they can actually produce more crops. Thank you all. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Angel Cruz. I am from the Philippines, representing a coastal town on the Bay of Manila. I think the area of your study is similar to our conditions. I have 2 questions. One, can you cite examples of vegetable farming in water, in aquaponics? And number 2, you mentioned there is a shift to combining shrimp culture with rice.
Rice.
Can you
Yes.
describe that process?
Okay.
Thank you.
Brief, please.
Okay, thank you so much. The answer, the first one, can you actually repeat the first question?
Just what kind of vegetables will grow in water?
Okay, actually, the vegetable crops or the vegetables actually like some, say some wheat cultivation, and some varieties of actually corn that requires low water demand compared to rice, because as you know that rice production, it costs a huge amount of water. And second thing is that special types of actually crops, and as I showed earlier that there are some floating bed agriculture systems. So the water that is available in the actually floating condition, the crops can easily actually take water from there. And some of the spaces in between the actually ponds, some say crops, how can I say, actually there is a special actually crops that can be available in some usually in water burden area, but problem is that actually this area typically was not actually familiar with this crop pattern. But second thing is that the second question, answer to your second question, that actually different types of aquaponic. Yes, people are getting much more familiar with this rainwater harvesting. They are preserving some ponds and some low-lying actually water areas. So And as I mentioned earlier, the actually short time life paddy fields, shorter life actually within 3 months this paddy can be cultivated. And with this paddy there are some fishes, small fishes can be actually grown and can be cultivated together in the similar pond. And on the upper hand there are some actually bench systems. They can also cultivate some other vegetables. So 3 typical actually crops within a same smaller pieces of land.
All right, very interesting system. I'm afraid we have to continue to keep the time. Thank you so much. The next presenter is coming from Vietnam. I would like to call to the floor Ngo Thi Tui. Floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here and present our studies to all of you. And my presentation with the title of Impact of Flood Risk on Agriculture in North Central Vietnam. Actually, this talk today is one result of our project related to flood risk map for the whole river basin in Vietnam. And today I would like to focus on the North Central Vietnam. Oh, sorry. Yep. My presentation includes 4 main parts. Firstly, I would like to give some introduction about the flood situation in Vietnam and also the North Central Vietnam. And the second, I would like to talk about the materials and the method I use to assess the flood risk on agriculture. And for the result, I would like to give some information and also give some discussion to highlight the impact of flood risk on agriculture. And after that, there are some conclusions will be retrieved. In Vietnam, flood occurs every year, and flood happen from the north to the south and from the highland to coastal. And you can see on the slide not only on the natural areas but also in urban areas, floods also occurs and become more and more extremely. For the North Central of Vietnam, the region located in the northern part of the central Vietnam, and this area is the typhoon prone, and every year, from our estimation, every year there are 5 to 6 typhoons impact and also land these areas. That's why the flood happen in this area because it's more severe than the other areas. And in this area, flood season from June to November, and this time consists with the agricultural seasons. I mean, paddy rice and the other annual crops. So that's why the impact of flood on agriculture in the area is very huge. And every year is damaged something like with the damage around maybe million US dollar. Now I would like to talk some information about flood damage in Vietnam and also in the North Central Vietnam. Floods cause huge damage in Vietnam, and in 2020 there is like new historical floods occurs in Vietnam, and the impacted areas is the whole of central Vietnam, from the north to the south, maybe more than around 10 provinces, coastal province, impacts of this flood. And it happened in the in the December and end of November and to December. So it is a bit late flood, and that caused the huge damage not only on agriculture but also for the many economic sectors in Vietnam. And the other flood in 2017 also occurs in the North Central, and in that part we receive the rainfall amount can reach maybe like 1,000 millimeter for 3 or 4 days. So it's really huge, very huge rainfall there, and it causes like the very big floods. And you can see on the slide the estimation economic loss in Vietnam. And 2017 here, actually the unit is a bit have a mistake. This damage maybe is approximate $1 billion, and for our countries that count a bit big proportion with our GDP. So in 2017, the total economic loss can reach to this one is maybe 3 or 4 3 billion US dollar. It's really big money for our country. And in Vietnam, we know that floods is really important for our development. I mean, economic and also social development. So that's why Vietnam government already released many documents and decrees to respond to a flood. And in our countries, we have one strategies to cover many natural disasters like flood, flash flood, and landslide. And for that, we try to map. We try to do the mapping for natural disaster in our countries. And I mentioned natural disaster risk. Then that's why flood risk definition is the most end-oriented concept to reduce flood damage, especially for the North Central Vietnam, one of the most vulnerable areas in our country with to flood. For the North Central, the areas include 3 provinces, and there are 2 transboundary rivers basin in that area between Vietnam and Laos. And flood occurs in this area in the same time. That means in the 3 provinces, flood occurs in the same duration and the same period of a year. And in this study, we consider 2 typical flood events in 2018 for the Ma River basin, and for 2019 for the Ka River basin. You can see on the slide the map of that 2 basins. Actually, the areas of the 2 basins, the most upstream belong to Lao PGR, and the downstream belong to Vietnam. And so the transboundary river basin is a bit complicated for flood warning and also flood management. The major methodology are used to assess flood risk in this presentation. I use IPCC concept that include hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. And for our countries, we also define natural disaster risk as the damage could be caused by disaster to people, properties, environment, and living condition, and also the other social economic aspect. And for these studies, the hazard indicators for is considered as normalized maximum flood depth and also normalized flood duration. We only consider that the two indicators that can be that are mostly impact on the agriculture. And for the expo indicator, we consider the area of paddy rice and also area of annual crops. And we also consider the number of cattle and poultry. For the vulnerability, we consider two components. Firstly, sensitivity, and the secondly, adaptive capacity. The sensitivity indicators include proportion of female labor in the agriculture sector, and also the number of poor and near poor households. And for the adaptive capacity, we consider the education, productivity of this area, and also we also consider the income, and also proportion using of internet or phone or something like that, and also disaster prevention training. And the
I
equation.
have to ask you to come to the conclusions, please.
Okay.
Please.
Yes. Okay. For the equation, we used the multiple equation to combine three major components of flood risk. And we also use the percentile classification, and also we use like the equal range of classification for hazard and risk. And for the flood risk mapping, we use the result from the flood simulation models. Here we use Mike flood of DHI, and we combine with that data in agricultural sectors. And from that, we developed flood risk mapping. And there are some results I would like to denote here. Firstly, flood hazard, you can see that the most areas under the flood hazards is in the lowland areas, and also there are some middle land areas also under the high or very high flood hazard. And in this study, we mostly consider the area under more than 0.5 meter that are more impacted to the agricultural crops. So, yeah.
We have to stop because
Okay.
of time.
Okay.
That's the rule.
One or two small slides, please.
The final slide for your conclusions. You're eating up our discussion time.
Okay.
Please.
Okay, so yeah, there's one more result I would like to mention here, that for the two river basins, you can see on the slide that most of area are under the moderate risk level. And for the high and very high risk level, even though there are many areas under the high flood hazard, however, because of economic and social aspect of exposed and vulnerability, so the flood risk level reduced. So the main conclusion in this study that the composite flooding risk of agriculture reason in agriculture is like the hazard bias. However, the economic and social aspect also play very important role to change the flooding risk on the agriculture. Yes, that is the most important findings I would like to mention, and thank you.
Thank you. I could allow for one very short question, short answer, if there is any. I'm coming.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is, your vulnerability indicator is locally indicator or is accepted in the scientific literature? I mean, you develop by yourself?
You mean the data or the
No,
indicator?
vulnerability indicators. In the tables, you mentioned some
Yeah.
indicators. So it is locally developed or by
Yeah, actually, the way we develop these indicators based on, firstly, for literature review, and also we also adopt the condition of the local area, and from that we select the most important indicators that can impact on agriculture sector. Yep. Yep.
Thank you so much. So we have 2 more presentations to go, and I would like to call Zed Zulkafi to the floor, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Okay. Good morning or afternoon. I'm not sure what the time is right now exactly. My name is Zed Diana Zulkafi. I'm from Malaysia. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you to the funders and organizers for this opportunity. I'm here on behalf of my research team from Malaysia to talk about our research work on index insurance for rice production in Malaysia, particularly looking in the context of climate change. I would like to first start with an introduction about what is the index insurance. What it is a risk mitigation, risk management and climate adaptation tool for agricultural systems. So unlike traditional insurance contracts that compensates losses based on actual damage measured on farm after an adverse event, what the index insurance does is compensates losses based on a proxy, on the realization of some index that proxies for yield losses. And this measurement can be, for example, average rainfall or average temperature or maximum rainfall, minimum rainfall, that's pre-designed for that particular area or farm that is being covered. So the index insurance actually is valued for its ability to eliminate a few things. One is adverse selection, and this is the data asymmetry between the insurer and the insured. And then the second thing is moral hazard, so that this is the tendency to incorrectly report damages to gain an advantage during compensation calculations. However, a wider acceptance of this index insurance as a tool in developing countries is hindered by what we call basis risk. Basis risk describes the risk of imperfect correlation between this index that is proxying for losses and the loss that it's trying to cover. And so what this means is that you may have an index indicating that there's loss happening, but that in actuality the losses doesn't happen, or vice versa, you have losses happening and the indices does not indicate so, and so the farmers don't get paid. And this basis risk can further subclassify into 3 different types. One is design basis risk, which relates to the selection of index, whether you choose the parameter that you choose, be it rainfall, river flow, or temperature. And then spatial basis risk, which relates to the geographical mismatch between where you're measuring your index and where the losses occur. And then finally, the temporal basis risk, which is related to the timing of the measurement of the index. And this issue with basis risk is further exacerbated by climate change, because the way this the way these indices are selected in the conventional way is to look at, observe historical records of the indices time series and then the yield time series and losses time series, and build a correlation or model between them. We call this a yield index model. And the problem with climate change is then we no longer expect the climate to stay the same, and therefore we can no longer assume that the index that we develop is going to be stationary over time. So we're interested in this question of how much this will affect the index insurance and its feasibility. And so we propose a way to sort of analyze this under different scenarios of climate change, and we do this through the use of process-based hydrological and crop growth modeling. And through this, we would then be able to produce time series of yield as well as hydroclimatic indices across multiple space, time, and climate scenario. So our study area is in Malaysia. This is in the northeast of the peninsula. it's a kind of a drought prone. It's not really as wet as Iran, for example. We're still quite wet on the whole. But this is an area that's particularly prone to dryness as compared to the rest of the country. And here is where 40% of the national rice production happens. So we call this place our national rice bowl. And so therefore, it's a very important agricultural production area. And rice is the only crop mainly grown here, and it's being grown in two planting seasons, the wetter main season and the drier off-season. But in both seasons, we have supplementary irrigation through dam releases upstream. And this is the process-based modeling that we did for the catchment. So what we used was the soil and water assessment tool. We calibrated this to reproduce the observation of stream flow, which is at the top, and then also rice yield, seasonal rice yield, which is the figure at the bottom. So we've had quite adequate success with this. And then now, once we have the model calibrated, we run 3 different climate change scenarios on them, and this is produced through regional climate modeling by the Cordex Southeast Asia team. And then we were able to produce some projections of river flow and future yield based on the different climate change scenarios and different climate horizons. So now we are able to extract out from our model at different locations at any given time the indices that we want to analyze, as well as the yield, the corresponding yield. And then we establish yield index modeling based on regression analysis, simple regression, yield against the individual indices, and we measure the strength of the relationship using the coefficient of determination, or R squared. Okay, so the indices that we used and analyzed in this study is river flow, mean rainfall, maximum rainfall, daily minimum maximum temperature, and solar radiation. And we computed this for every month and analyzed it against yield for the particular seasons. So what we have here on the figure is a plot that summarizes the R squared average across the HRU's rice-producing hydrological response units that we extracted from the model, and the bars represent the average, where the arrow bars represents the standard deviation across the different areas that we extracted, and the different colors represent the different RCM output, and what we're trying to compare here is how the indices are different depending on the climate that scenario that we're looking at. And what we observed was that there is a dominance of the predominance of solar radiation governing the relationship with yield, as is shown here, in the wetter future climate scenario. And in contrast, in the more drier climate future scenario, the temperature and rainfall is more prominent. And this result is different. This is for the main season. We have results for the off season of planting that we're not showing here as well. And in the off main season, the temperature is the most predominant index. So it varies considerably. We further could gain insight into the nature of the relationship between the index and the yield. So it's not really clear here, but if you look at the reds, they represent mostly represent the negative, strong negative correlation between temperature indices and yield, and blue represents a strong positive correlation between solar radiation and yield. So the higher the heat, the higher the temperature, the lesser the rice growth. And the opposite is true for solar radiation. And we also could determine that the index for particular months, in particular during the flowering stage of crop growth in the main season, is critical and most corresponding or most associated with the yield for the season. Finally, we did the risk estimation. So for this work, for this part of the work, we tried to compare what if we assume stationarity in the index, and then the other, and this is represented in the black, and then yellow here for one RCM output. We allowed the index to vary according to the climate horizon, and what we observed was that the risk estimation diverged quite widely. Overestimation would be a loss to the farmers because they would have to pay more in terms of the insurance premiums, whereas underestimation would be a cost to the insurer. That's the end of my talk. In conclusion, indices that best explain variability in yield. ocean to be different in different climate scenarios, time horizons and locations. They affected the estimation of risk, which will transfer into the insurance contract. And then, therefore, what we want to recommend is that index insurance, designed for it to work as a climate adaptation tool, must consider all sorts of uncertainty, and this could be better supported through process-based modeling. Thank you.
Thank you, Zed, for keeping the time. We have time for questions. There is a question coming.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I know that I understand that you use SWOT model to calibrate, and after that you use climatic input to assess the yield changing over time. So the parameters in SWOT model will be the same.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, and do you have any assessment to check whether the parameter there maybe also impact on climate change, and that means that the parameter will be changed over time too? So maybe it duplicated.
I understand your question. No, we assume that the model is, when we calibrate it for the observed condition. So we assume that the model can represent our catchment, and we use the model as is to run across the multiple climate scenarios.
There's another question.
Alicia Correa, Justus Libre University. You mentioned that you use Cordex data, right? So I am wondering how many models did you use as input? You mentioned some scenarios, but to know how many models, and also how SWOT handle the uncertainty as the input has some uncertainty, so how the model transmits this uncertainty to your final results. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So the Cordex C, I think, have about 15 models that they simulated for in terms of the RCMs for this particular region. But for the work that I presented, we use only 3 of them to represent sort of somewhat neutral future climate, somewhat wetter and somewhat drier. We didn't quite manage to run them all yet. In terms of the uncertainty, we only did bias correction of this RCM, so we assessed how they compare with historically observed time series, so rainfall and temperature, and then we corrected for the biases. So that's the extent of our assessment of that particular part of the uncertainty.
Okay, I would have a short question as well. You are considering climate change, and also several rice varieties are responding different to climate change and to the scenarios. Are you factoring in that the different response of different varieties of rice,
no,
which could be maybe also then for future could be a hint of what kind of varieties are adapted to future scenarios?
That's a very good question. Malaysia has recently developed like more drought-resistant rice varieties, but for this particular work, we've just looked at the most dominant rice variety that we've used. We could consider that into future work. Thanks.
Okay, thanks a lot. Yeah, I think we have to continue. Sorry. The final presentation is taking us to another continent. I would like to call George to the floor.
Okay, thank you very much to everyone for being present here. What I will present to you now, it's actually an ongoing research project which is called Biodiversity Protection, Food Security and Sustainable Development Synergies, Trade-offs and Network Effects. This is something that I'm developing with some colleagues from the Los Andes University in Bogotá, the Center for the Sustainable Development Goals, also in Bogotá, and I am part of the Environment and Sustainability area of the Simón Bolívar Andean University in Ecuador. I'm also part of the SDG Nexus network, and one of the things that we do within the network is to monitoring SDGs. So let me briefly start with some of the motivations for our research. We had been looking at the literature regarding the nexus, the different nexus, and we have noticed that biodiversity protection is not always concerned within this literature, despite the importance that this goal has in the context of global change. We also have noticed that in the literature about SDG interactions, there is not many studies at the regional level. Most of the studies are at the global level. There are some studies at the local one, but mostly at the global level. And we had identified also that despite there is certain recognition about the importance of indirect interaction between SDGs, there is not a lot of characterization of those interactions. That may be related with the fact that the methodology that will be fit for this objective is network interactions, which is not often used in SDG monitoring. So in this context, the main goal of our research is to produce practical knowledge for establishing priorities regarding the implementation of SDG 15 and SDG 14, which are the two SDGs oriented towards biodiversity protection, inland biodiversity, and also ocean and marine biodiversity, in their interaction with SDG 8, which is about economic development, and SDG 2, which is about food security. As you can see, what we are trying to do is to look at the interaction between environmental, social, and economic objectives, and the graphic that you see there is the kind of perspective that we want to promote, and is that the achievement of the environmental SDGs is the condition for the achievement of the social and economic objectives. Okay, so let me briefly describe the methodology that we are using. We are combining qualitative and quantitative methodologies. In the qualitative methodologies, we are doing a nexus assessment of those four SDGs through two techniques. One is a rapid literature review, which is a particular kind of systematic literature review of scientific literature, and the other one is experts consultation. And what we aim to do with those two methodologies is to identify the key interactions between the most important targets of those objectives for the biodiversity protection. With the information gathered in this qualitative stage, we will proceed to a network assessment, which is a more quantitative methodology, where we will do two things. One, to do quality control through an analysis of quantitative indicators related to those SDGs, but also to network metrics. And what we want to obtain from this process is basically some recommendations and policy implications. Here is the methodology that we will use for moving from the qualitative to the quantitative, which was actually suggested some years ago by Iksu, Nilsson, and McCollum, and some other researchers, which not only characterize the interactions between SDGs as synergies and trade-offs, but also describe the intensity of those interactions. So you can have weak synergies or weak trade-offs, and this scale provides us the possibility of doing so. So what we will do is, after carrying out our literature review, we will take the information contained in this literature and we translate it into this scale, and this will allow us to do the network analysis. So let me give you one example. This is not our results. This is a study at the global level. We will do something similar for Latin America and the Caribbean countries. And here you can see the different interaction between different targets. So you have the target in, which is the one which influences the target out. And you can see how, for example, you have bidirectional relationships and that are characterized by different degrees of intensity. So in order to describe you or give you an example of the kind of results that we aim to obtain from our research, we processed the results of one research at the global level by Nilsson and his colleagues. When they and what this represents is the different series of interactions between several targets of the SDGs that we will analyze. So as you can see here, the targets are clustered by their different relationships in subsets, because not all the targets relate to each other. You can see that the synergies are represented by by green arrows, and the trade-offs by the red ones, and the intensity of the interaction is represented by the width of the arrow, and also by the number that you can see there. I will explain you later on what this means. But this is an example of the kind of results that we aim to obtain. The number 1 represents the highest centrality within the neighbor, which means the higher degree of importance of the target for the protection of biodiversity, and the highest number represents the lower importance. So for example, as you can see here, 14.4, which is a target focused on the eradication of overfishing and the regulation of unreported, unregulated and illegal fishing, is the most important one within the network that we are taking into consideration, and this target is followed by 2.4 and so on. So to give you one example of why this can be important and useful for policymakers, let me describe what you are seeing here, and it's the centrality of 14.4, which was the target that I was mentioning before, which is about the eradication of overfishing. So you can see that there is one strong interaction between this target and 2.1, which is eradication of hunger, as overfishing has been identified as one of the main risks for food security at the global level. You can see also how at the same time this target positively interacts, for example, with 8.1, which is economic growth, and with 8.5, which is decent work. And this may be related with the fact that only fighting against overfishing we can ensure the preservation of small and artisanal fishing, which is a really important source of economic, of employment in developing countries. And it is kind of calculated that around 270 million people are working in that sector. And you can see an example here of indirect positive interaction. So to the extent that it's contributing to employment, at the same time it's contributing to 14.7, which is increasing economic benefits of fishing to small island nations. And at the same time, you can see how there are complex interactions in which, for example, the 14.4 positively influences 8.1, and at the same time, this one has a positive feedback to 14.4. Now, you can see on top the 14.2, which is sustainable management of ocean resources. So despite the fact that it has a positive synergy with 2.1, which is eradication of hunger, you can see how it has a relatively strong trade-off with 8.1, economic growth, which means basically that the positive effect that it may have in food security can be reduced by its economic implications. So for a policymaker, it will make sense to put a lot more effort in obtaining 14.4, as at the same time is ensuring the economic and social possibilities for the sustainable management. This does not necessarily mean that 14.2 has not to be pursued, but that the policies designed in order to do so need to consider how to, at the same time, generate positive effects at the social and economic level, as it ensures the possibility of the attainment of this goal. So let me briefly finish with some messages. The first one is that SDG interactions are characterized not only by synergies but also by trade-offs, which implies a series of difficult choices for policymakers. In the case of Latin America, we know that biodiversity protection is a key area in which we have to work in order to ensure or to reduce the effects of global change, and that's why we are proposing to analyze what we are calling provisionally biodiversity food economic development nexus. Also that network centrality measures, which is the methodology that we are also proposing, are a useful tool for studying those interactions. And finally, that this study will not only produce the kind of results that I was just showing to you, but it will also allow us to identify the gaps in the literature, which may be used for further research agenda. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, George. Questions to this more, high-level global analysis of the Sustainable Development Goals, please.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is, who were your group of the respondents, and how many people responded to this quiz? I mean, in the ranking and giving the numbers. Which groups you use actually?
Yeah, thank you for your question. This is a completely different methodology. Actually, what we are doing is to processing scientific literature about the specific interactions that we are interested about. So what we are doing is that we have chosen some key targets within the Sustainable Development Goals, and then we are identifying the keywords that are often used in the scientific literature about those interactions, and then we are carrying out a series of systematic searches on some databases for identifying the literature. Then when we identify the literature, what we do is that we read it, we extract the conclusions, and then we process it in order to characterize the interactions as they manifest in Latin America. So that's the methodology that we are using, which is not,
No, you use machine system and maybe meta-analysis of the...
what we are doing is actually a sort of qualitative meta-synthesis, but something like that.
What about the opinions of the policymakers, the experts in
that's the second stage that we are carrying out, and it's experts consultation, because we know that we are going to find some knowledge gaps, and that's what we are carrying out this second stage.
Thank you.
Do we have more questions to this concept? That seems not.
Marcus, there is.
Oh, there's another one. Yep.
Well, it's not a question, it's just a comment. Why didn't you thought simply of assessing the coherences and the contradictions among the objectives just in putting them in one matrix, for example? Of course, it would be like a large matrix. Then it will be much easier to understand and illustrate as a visualization tool, but also you can also assess particular impacts of each objective on another one. So, yeah. So yes, I wonder why you just used the figure.
Okay. I probably didn't show it, but the advantage of a network analysis is that you can see indirect effects. So to give you a brief example, so you can see, for example, how here in this kind of graph, you can see how 14.4 benefits or has a synergy with 8.5 and at the same time has one with 14.7, which is something a little bit more difficult to show in a table. So that's basically the main reason for that.
Okay, and if I also may have a question to you. So you showed sometimes a very kind of exclusive relation, so that if this one is SDG aim is followed by a measurement or a measure, it has absolutely disastrous consequence for another SDG sub goal. So what do you think? how do you evaluate this then? You mean that that's absolutely no-go then, or is that how do you try maybe to offset these trade-offs? Or
yeah, that's actually what we know now that it may happen. You know, you can have strong trade-offs. So I think the implication is not necessarily not to pursue that target or that goal, but probably to modulate through policy design. So, for example, in this other subset, there is a really interesting relationship between 2.3 and 2.4. 2.4 is sustainable agricultural practices, and as you can see, it has a lot of synergies with 15.2 and so on, which are biodiversity protection related targets. And 2.3 is increasing productivity of small farmers, and it has a lot of trade-offs with the same objectives. So it makes no sense to say that you shouldn't pursue the increases in the productivity of farmers, but what you should do is to connect those two objectives and increase this productivity through sustainable agricultural practices.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus.
A very interesting approach. I think given a hand, it's always difficult, also within our niche where we are doing research or where we are active, and we are very much convinced that we are working towards a sustainable development goal and a target, and sometimes we don't see the secondary or a hidden impact on another target, and that kind of approach could help maybe also to work towards these trade-offs, what we all think is happening. Well, okay, so this session is coming to the end, and it's my task, I think, to wrap up a little bit. If there are no further comments or general inputs to the session, the name of the session was Implication of Water Security for Food Security, and we have seen several examples coming from innovative and autonomous farmers, from examples from Iran and also from Bangladesh having difficulties with different situations, drought and water stress for their crops, and also salinity was mentioned. And it was shown how farmers develop solutions to cope with these challenges. And then we've come to a different aspect. We have seen a sample from Vietnam, and dealing with flood, where water is then suddenly endangering or threatening the yields coming from floods, and how this was then finally dealt with from the farmer's perspective and also from the government side. So this is bringing us to a different level, and that's somehow also the same like these modeling tools coming from the SWOT model, from this example from Malaysia, which is then a tool of digitalization finally, helping farmers or helping to predict and to develop strategies for an insurance, or that farmers can cope with these challenges. And I think that's very nice how we learned actually that maybe traditional knowledge of farmers and digitalization can find together to improve at this point, and to mitigate and to adapt, of course, to adapt to climate change and these challenges coming from water scarcity. Well, and finally, we looked at a tool to reach out or to address our overarching goals of the Sustainable Development Goals. I think that was a very nice overview of different levels, different scales to address this topic. And I would like to thank all of the participants and all of the presenters for their ideas here and for the questions. And I think we have now, if there's no further question or comment from yours, and we have reached the time for the lunch break. Would like to close the session then, and hope to see you also during the rest of the conference. Just an announcement in that, of course, the University of Hohenheim is very much interested in cooperating with you, and since the conference is always also for networking, you're welcome to take some information here I can provide from the University of Hohenheim, from our Hans Rutenberg Institute. There's a lot of options for you to cooperate since we are interdisciplinary, interested in working in tropical agriculture. Please come approach me and I can hand over you a flyer from our institutes for future cooperation. Thank you very much for your attendance and your time.